A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, teachers of truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquatham. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And today's lesson, I wanted to just read through a news story on this is on thehill.com, and the title says Chelsea Clinton launching podcast to target public health alternative facts. All right, I'll say it like that, because we're kind of in a time now where we're, you can't really say things like how you want to say it. But that's pretty much the article. So I want to read through it and kind of just, pull certain things, certain ideas from it, and then, go through the scriptures in regards to this, right? This sort of came out a couple of days ago, I think on the 2nd. And for those who don't know, Chelsea Clinton is a daughter of former President Clinton, Bill Clinton, right? He was in office around in I think the early, mid 1990s, I believe. And, he was responsible for implementing that certain pieces of legislation, such as three strikes law, which had a very detrimental, a very negative effect upon our people, because after he left office, and then Bush came in, Bush Senior, the prison population, like it doubled, right? Three strikes, you're out. And essentially, and then on top of that, you had that floozy band-aid that was in president before Trump, Joe Biden. He had a hand in orchestrating and in that particular piece of legislation, right? So just to show you the kind of people that we're dealing with, right? So I want to read the article here, and it says, I'm just going to kind of skim through it, right? But I'll put the link in the description. So it says Chelsea Clinton, the daughter of former President Bill Clinton, the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, it says is launching a podcast about public health, right? It says, how many of us have looked at the latest headlines and thought that it can't be true? Starting tomorrow, I hope you'll join me with a series of experts on my podcast. This can't be true, right? So that's the name of her podcast. So it says Clinton is not new to the podcasting world. It says things are getting weird in the world about public health, childhood, shots, I'll say it like that, are suddenly up for debate. Fluoride is being described as industrial waste, and it feels like everyone is talking about raw milk. It says a description of that can be true. Podcast reads, it says navigate this chaotic time with public health expert Dr. Chelsea Clinton. For every week, then doctors, dietitians, parenting experts, and more expose pseudoscience to help us sort fact from fiction, right? So pseudo fake science knowledge, so fake knowledge when you put it together, right? I don't really need the scriptures for that, right? But shows you the power of words, and people get tripped up by a lot of these different words that they read here. It says below, Clinton teaches health policy at Columbia U and serves as the vice chair of the Clinton Foundation. It says the launch of the podcast comes amid of heated debates over the health policy in the U.S. And before I continue, I just want to say that this is not, we're not giving out medical information. I have to say that, because, anyways, the U.S., especially surrounding health and human services, Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his policy stances, right? So It says more than 1,000 people who have been employed by the HHS recently demanded Kennedy to resign after his ouster of the director of the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention and other moves they were claimed compromising the health of the nation. Right. So I believe there was a situation between him and discussing. I believe it was Tylenol, if I'm not mistaken. But okay, going back, that's pretty much it. But why do you think I'm reading this? You might think, oh goodness, like, quiet. Why are you reading this? I'm reading this to explain that you know these people who have podcasts, they're pretty much and trying to give information to especially our people that gravitate to it towards this because as a matter of fact, let me get the precept to best explain why a lot of our people might gravitate towards this, right? To show you, I want to show you something real quick in the Apocrypha. To show you the nature of, our people. Let's see. Because it clearly mentioned that, she's a doctor, right? And I believe when you go into the word doctor as well, in the etymology, okay, let me get that first real quick. Hold on. um, 1 second. Doctor. So here you have doctor. It shows it says teacher, instructor, learned man. It says medical professional, duly licensed to practice medicine. There was 1 second. Where is it? Okay, here, when you go into the etymology of the word or the verb doctor, it says to alter, to disguise, to the purpose of deception. It means to falsify, right? I just wanted to get that for edification. Now, okay, let me go to the Apocrypha because I did say that. This is Sirach chapter 13. I start at verse 21. And I'll read down to 23, and it says, a rich man beginning to fall is held up of his friends, but a poor man being down is thrust away by his friends, showing you the nature between a rich man and a poor man. So I'm using this as an example to show that these people are seen as the rich in this society because of those titles. Those titles have a lot of weight. Doctor, what's it called? Senior executive, all these different titles that people have, according to this world, they have status. Clinton, her last name also has a certain level of weight. My father is Bill Clinton, you know what I'm saying? So when people take what they say, people are going to take it and esteem it as gold. They're going to esteem it like, man, this is good information. My goodness, right? So, verse 22, and it says, when a rich man is fallen, he hath many helpers. He speaketh things not to be spoken, and yet men justify him. The poor man slipped, and they rebuked him too. He spake wisely, and could not have no place. When a rich man speaketh, every man holdeth his tongue. Look what he saith, and extol it to the clouds. Wow, this is very, very good info. Thank you. This is the type of mindset to show you the difference between how people look at, the men of the Lord, the prophets, and then how they look at these people, the Clintons, the Obamas, they look at these people and esteem what they say as above all gold, because they have that status according to this world. It's not necessarily about what is true. It's just they have the status and they can say anything, and they would think, and people would think, especially our people, because they don't have essentially a Berean spirit on them to go and search and look things out and actually be diligent to try and figure out what is actually being said, you know. So that's what they, they extol it and they think, my goodness, this person is speaking, truth, right? So it says, but if a poor man speaketh, they say, what fellow is this? If he stumble, they will help to overthrow him, right? So just to show you the difference between how they look at a lot of us, and then, because we don't have that status, we don't have that, what's it called? We don't have those, we don't have a weight, we don't have titles according to this world. And the scriptures say this, the foolish, the wisdom of this world is foolish, to roughly paraphrase. It doesn't amount to anything. And then when they look at us also, because we're also very bold at the same time, we're also very bold in what we're saying because we're speaking, thus saith the Lord, right? Because the Lord imbued us with understanding to understand what's going on, which kind of segues into my next point. Because when you look at these people today, they are mostly, seen as the modern day Chaldeans and astrologers. They're seen as, people to be consulted with when it comes to very weighty matters that happen upon the planet Earth, right? And that is a very, very common trend. You realizing, during these times, it's like people, they get together, they discuss some points on a podcast, but there is absolutely no solution to the problem. There is no getting together, with a lot of these people. The Lord is still bringing division and still bringing civil war, still bringing the MOTB, still bringing through World War III. All these things are happening because we're occupied. And we know and we understand prophecy, right? And that's one of these things that these people don't have. They don't have that understanding of prophecy of what's going on because essentially it's a secret, right? And the Lord gave it. As a matter of fact, let me get that. This is Amos chapter 3 verse 7, and it says, surely the Lord Yahweh will do nothing but revealeth his secret unto his servants the prophets, right? So it's the prophets that have that understanding of actually what's going on, right? And are telling, especially our people to come back to the Lord, right? To understand, a judgment is coming, right? So, and then to not, trust thy enemy. That's another thing also, because if you go into the bizarre activity that these Clintons were involved in, and how they were had a heavy hand in being responsible for your condition as a people, why would you trust what is being told to you from their mouth, right? But our people are very simple. The scriptures talk about how wisdom uttereth her voice in the streets, and she crieth in the chief place of concourse, right? This is where you're going to get real wisdom to actually understand and navigate and know who your enemies are. But through this society and the gifts of this society, so people having, Jay can get a nice house, they can get a nice woman, she can bake apple pie, she could they can get nice Dalmatian, all these different 401k I'm sorry 401 K retirement plan, RRSP, all these different things have essentially blinded our people to the condition and knowing and realizing that you still have enemies. These gifts, this is the things that this society has, that has given you, that you have access to, has essentially blinded our people and made them extremely comfortable to they've forgotten the fact that they're still they still have enemies, and these people are still enemies, right? The scriptures say, never trust thine enemy, straight up, right? So, another point I also wanted to hit was, I wanted to just read this in, let me go to it in the book of Daniel. Okay, this is Daniel chapter 2. verse 1. And it says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. For they came and stood before the king. So the king calls all these different advisors to be able to give him understanding into the type of dream that he had. Right? So if you look at it, so astrologers and magicians, they're basically like people who they look at the creations, they look at, for example, astrology, people are very into the stars and looking into the stars to try and understand and give insight of what's actually happening. The magicians, the Chaldeans, very, very similar, right? As a matter of fact, let me get that in the etymology. Hold on. Astrologers. So someone who observes stars, right? Here it says one who professes to determine the influence of planets on persons and events, right? So that's very key here. So keep that in mind, right? Let's see, where was I? Okay, so this is verse 3. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. And then spake the Chaldeans to the king on Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants, and we will show the interpretation. And the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the good thing is gone from me. If ye will make not known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if ye show the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. And I'm reading this, to show some parallels of what's actually going on now versus what happened in ancient kingdoms back then. So now Nebuchadnezzar calls his advisors, calls these guys, kind of like how a king or a prime minister has certain advisors, call them to, give me understanding of what's going on with this particular sector. So in this case, the dream, right? And none of these people here, as a matter of fact, let me read it and I'll make my point. And it says, then he answered again, and let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. And the king answered and said, I know the certainty that ye would gain the time, because ye see the king is gone from me. But if ye will not make known unto me the dream, but there is one decree for you, for ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know, and show me the interpretation thereof. Right? And verse 10, and it says, and the Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asked such things at any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. Right? So eventually, when you go into the story, Daniel eventually steps in and he's able to actually give the king the understanding of the dream. Right? And I'm reading this to show you the parallels, like I was saying earlier, because the prophets are going back to the precept I brought up earlier in Amos, the prophets were the ones that were able to give understanding in regards to of current events of what's going on, right? They were able to give insight. Just like Joseph, it was the same way. He was able to give insight into regards to the Pharaoh's dream, right? And the prophets today, it's the same thing. The prophets are the ones today giving understanding, I should say, in regards to what's going on, right? And these people who have these different podcasts represent these modern day, so-called astrologers and Chaldeans and magicians and so on and so forth, because they believe in a certain type of thing that might occur upon the planet Earth, right? But people flock to them because they have that status. People flock to them because they have, titles. This is why I was mentioning about the rich man and the poor man earlier, because they have that, so-called social wealth in this society. They hold that as opposed to upholding what the poor man says. Because as the scriptures also say, the poor man's wisdom is despised. It's not looked upon as favorable, right? So we're not looked upon as favorable of understanding of what's going on, because we look like a bunch of, bums, unemployed people, you know. But Paul said we are rude in speech, but not in knowledge. So this is why, because we understand the prophecies of what's actually going on, not these people. They don't have it, right? So going into the story, I'm not going to go through the whole chapter, but Daniel was able to give understanding in regards to the Nebuchadnezzar's dream, give him insight, right, and help him to have that interpretation as he was asking for, and it gave him favor, right? So these people don't have the spirit of prophecy upon them, or the understanding of what's actually going on, right? To show you that, which is then is now, and there is no new thing under the sun. They're just, people, they are, just as I said before, they are just modern day astrologers. They're just modern day Chaldeans. They don't have the interpretation thereof to understand what's going on. Another example is, let's switch kingdoms. Let's go Rome. So Rome had what you call is the practice of inauguration, where you had somebody who was an augur who practiced augury, and this mindset was to be able to observe the behavior of birds. So it shows you just a little bit different. Is a lot of the times what these people, they observe things, these carnal things in the sky, of what's going on in the sky and so on and so forth, right? So for them, it was observing the behavior of birds, right? Okay, so for example, if they saw 5 birds in the air, it would be, for example, let's just say if it was 5 years of peace of whatever, right? But we know, for example, Babylon is not going to be healed because it says that, right? So, that's pretty much, it, because, these people are not looked, as a matter of fact, I guess I'll end off with this precept. Um, oh. This is Jeremiah 3, verse 15, and it says, "And I will give you pastors according to mine heart, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding," right? So a pastor is, when you go into the word pastor, you get the word pastures, essentially an area where it's like an open field where cattle, sheep, oxen, graze. They eat the food, they eat the grass, and so on and so forth, to be able to nourish them. That's where you get the word pastor from, right? And this times our pastors are, our true pastors are the apostles, and those on down, to be able to give us understanding of what's going on, and more time again of what they're saying is showing to, constantly be true, you know and it's not like they've been wavering or anything like that, like a lot of other camps and so on and so forth, right? So they've given us the understanding, right? So our people don't see that, because they represent also the so-called poor. I hate to say it like this, but the poor man. It's just a visual thing of what people see, because they think that, to look a certain way, the message can be false just because we look a certain way, right? So that's pretty much it. I kind of just want to share that, because these people, they don't have, as Kanye said in an interview years ago, they don't have the answers. you know And the script, and on top of that, this is mostly strictly about health, and not to go make I'm not making this like a lesson into health, but the scriptures teach you how to eat first and foremost, because we have dietary laws. Another example was, when King Hezekiah was sick, the prophet Isaiah gave him boiled figs, to eat. And if I'm not mistaken, figs they have lots of digestive properties. That's good for your digestive and your stomach health, right? So it's the scriptures covers everything, right? The scripture says, "Seek out the book of the Lord and read," right? So um, that's pretty much it, because our people need to understand that these people are not your friends. They have platforms, but their interests are not for you, right? So I'll leave it there, but Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. I just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Makakodash, double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Until next time, I say Shalom.